Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the book of Job. Today, we'll be looking at chapters 11 and 12. And in chapter 11, we hear from Job's third friend, Zophar. He is indignant, or he's angry, kind of annoyed probably that Job still maintains his innocence. He wishes that God himself would intervene to declare the true state of affairs. And it's not for human beings to pass judgment on God's ways. His mysteries are too deep for us to understand. So whatever he decides must be right, and there can be no appeal. So like the others, Zophar's advice is that Job should repent. So this is kind of following in that same footsteps of the friends, okay? They're all just assuming that Job has done something wrong and that all Job needs to do is repent and he'll be forgiven. And so they're also getting, if you listen to that, they're getting tired of listening to Job complain, right? They've heard him complain, they've heard him make excuses, and what they think are excuses, but in reality, it's just the truth. They think Job's making excuses for himself when in reality, he's done nothing wrong. But Zophar, he was even more harsh than the first two friends. And if you read this passage, and make sure you do, it's a quick one, make sure you read it, and it really comes out. Like you can see it in the way that Zophar talks to him. He's not pulling any punches. He is not sugarcoating it. He's coming right out. And he even accused Job of babbling on and ridiculing others, and even implies in verses 11 and 12 that Job is worthless and stupid. Look what he says. He says, "For he knoweth vain men, he seeth wickedness also, will he not consider it? For vain men would be wise, though man be born like a wild ass's colt." So that's not exactly a compliment that you're giving your friend, right? Because when he says, "For he knoweth vain men," he's talking about God. God knows vain men, and he's talking about how Job is basically putting himself up against the Almighty. Job is basically saying, "I've done nothing wrong, but God is punishing me," and that is kind of what Job says. But Job is saying that because he actually hasn't done anything wrong. So look at what Zophar is doing. He's doing exactly what Job's other friends have done, and he's telling Job that he's sinned, and if he just repent and return to God, all would be well again. So just like Eliphaz and Bildad, Zophar does get a few things right. It's true that a life of faith in God requires us to honestly deal with sin and seek to obey and please God. And it's true that God blesses his people with hope, security, and peace. But suffering for his glory and their good, but Zophar was wrong in not leaving room for God to allow his people to experience suffering for his glory and for their good without them knowing why. And remember, Job is the exception, not the rule. But not all bad things that happen to us are punishment from God. That's important to remember. Sometimes when we have bad things happen to us, it's because God is trying to teach us something or to help us grow. So once Zophar is done attacking Job, verbally, of course, just the verbal attacks, they're not fighting or wrestling or anything, Job responds just about like he has every other time. And Job has evidently had enough, because he even responds with a little bit of sarcasm here. He says in verse 2, "No doubt wisdom will die with you." In other words, he's telling Zophar that his head is too big. He says, so I'll read verse 2, chapter 12, verse 2. "No doubt, but ye are the people, and wisdom shall die with you." He's saying like, okay, Zophar, we get it. You know everything. Your head is too big. You don't know what you're talking about here. I'm sure none of us know people like that in our lives. But he goes on to explain that sometimes God's ways aren't an open book, which is so true. He's had enough of these friends assuming they know what's going on, just because that's usually the way it works. So that's kind of a common theme here. Like, it's easy to look at the story of Job and to look down on his friends like, these are really crappy friends. Job is at his lowest moment, and his friends are just basically talking down to him, talking bad about him. Job, just repent. Just get over yourself and repent to God. And this whole time, Job hasn't done anything wrong. And it's easy to look at his friends and say, wow, those are pretty crappy friends. Like, those are not good friends. But why are they acting that way? Why are they saying that? Well, because that's usually the way it is. That's usually the way it works. Usually when someone was going through these things, it's because God was judging them for the wrong that they had done. But that Job, again, is the exception. And that's kind of the theme so far in this early part what we've read so far in this book of Job. And if we read through to the end of chapter 12, we'll see that Job, even in the midst of all his suffering, still realizes the power of God. He knows that God is omnipotent and he is responsible for everything. Even in the midst of all this, Job knew that his God was glorious and almighty. And that's something that we can learn from Job today. Our lives may not always be easy, and there may be times that we don't feel like God is anywhere near us. But he is, and he loves us, and he's working things out according to his plan. And I'm sure when Job was going through this, he didn't understand God's plan. Well, we know he didn't because he says as much. But God did have a plan, and God was still in control. God was not allowing Satan to kill Job. He was just allowing Job to be tested so he could see his faith. And sometimes that happens with us as well, that God allows us to go through things so that our faith can be made stronger and so that we can grow closer to him through it all. Well, that's it today from Job, and I'll see you tomorrow here in the book of Isaiah.